The Satanic Mill by Otfried Preussler. The third year, 3, an attempted escape. The next morning they found that Merton had disappeared. His bed was stripped, the blankets lay neatly folded at its foot, his working smock and apron hung in the press. His clogs were standing under his stool. No one had seen him go. They did not notice his absence until he failed to come into breakfast. Baffled, they searched the mill for him, but he was nowhere to be found. "He's run away," said Leishko. "We must tell the master." Hanzo barred the way. "That's my job as head journeyman," he said. "Or is that news to you?" They all expected the master to fly into a rage when he heard the news of Merton's disappearance, and they were waiting for shouts, curses, and imprecations, but nothing of the kind happened. At dinner, Hanzo told the others that the master seemed to take it lightly. All he had said was, "Merton's crazy." And when the head journeyman asked what was to be done, he replied, "Let him be. He'll come back of his own accord." When he said that, he winked, Hanzo told them. And the wink was worse than 1,000 curses. "I turned so cold inside me, I thought I'd freeze to solid ice on the spot. Let's hope Merton's all right." "Huh," snorted Leishko. "Anyone who runs away from this mill must know what he's in for. Well, Merton has a broad back, broad enough to carry a load of trouble." "Oh, do you think so?" asked Juro. "To be sure I do," said Leishko, and he brought his fist down on the table to emphasize his words, whereupon the soup in the bowl splashed up into his face. He let out a yell, for the soup was thick and boiling hot. "Who did that?" cried Leishko, wiping his eyes and cheeks. "Which of you went and did that?" One of the other journeymen must obviously be responsible. Stupid Juro was the only one who merely seemed bothered by the waste of good soup. "Better not bang the table another time, Leishko," said he. "Not quite so hard, anyway." Merton came back that evening as dusk was falling, just as Krabbit had feared. He stood in the doorway silently, his head bowed. The master came out to meet them, in front of all the other journeymen. He was not angry with Merton. Instead, he mocked him, asking how he liked his little expedition, and why he was back so soon. Didn't he like it in the villages, or what? You don't want to tell me, eh, Merton? You haven't opened your mouth for weeks, have you? But I'm not forcing you to speak. You can run away again for all I care. Try it. Try it as often as you like, only don't set your hopes too high, Merton. You're not the man to do what no one has ever done yet. Merton did not flicker an eyelash. "Well, make believe if you want," said the master. "You didn't get away, but you don't mind, eh? We know better. I and the 11 of them," he pointed to the journeyman and Lobash. "We all know better. Now get out!" Merton crept up to bed. The miller's men were all unhappy that evening, except for Leishko. "We must persuade him not to try running away again," said Hanzo. "You try," said Stashko, "if you think it will do any good. I don't." "No," said Krabbit, "I doubt if he'll listen." Overnight the weather changed, and when they went out of doors next morning, it was bitterly cold, without a breath of wind. There was ice on the window panes, and ice on the rim of the trough under the pump. The puddles around it were covered with ice. Molehills were frozen stiff, and the ground was hard as bone. "It'll be bad for the winter sowing," said Petar. "No snow, and now this frost. A lot of the seed will be spoiled out there in the fields." Krabbit was glad to see Merton appear at breakfast with the others and attack his bowl of oatmeal greedily, obviously making up for yesterday. Then they went to work, and no one noticed Merton slip away from the mill again, this time in broad daylight. It was not until they came in for dinner at noon that they realized he had gone once more. Merton was away for 2 days and 2 nights, longer than any runaway had ever managed before, and they were just beginning to hope he had safely made his escape when he came stumbling across the meadows toward the mill. On the morning of the 3rd day, he was exhausted and blue with cold, and there was a dreadful look on his face. Krabbit and Stashko went to meet him at the door and led him inside. Peter took one of his shoes off, Kito the other, and Hanzo told Juro to bring a bowl of ice-cold water. He put Merton's frozen feet into it and began to rub them. "We must get him to bed as quick as we can," said he. "I hope he's going to be all right." While the men were busy tending Merton, the door opened and the master came into the room. He stood watching them for a while, but this time he refrained from mocking. He waited until they were about to take Merton upstairs. "Just a moment," said he. Getting closer to Merton, he told him, "I think twice should be enough for you, Merton. There is no road that leads away from here. You will never escape me." That very morning, Merton took the 3rd and, as he thought, the final way out. The miller's men guessed nothing. They had taken him up to the attic, tipped a hot drink down his throat, wrapped him in blankets, and put him to bed. Hanzo stayed with him, sitting on the next bed, watching until he was convinced Merton had fallen asleep and did not need him anymore. Then he went down to join the others at work. Stashko and Krabbit had been busy for several days dressing the millstones. They had finished 4 pairs of stones, and today was the turn of the 5th. They were just about to loosen the cramps so as to get the stones when the door of the grinding room flung open and Lobash burst in, white-faced, his eyes wide with terror. He was gesticulating and shouting. He seemed to be shouting the same thing again and again. The miller's men could not make it out until Hanzo stopped the machinery. It was quiet in the mill then, and only Lobash's voice could be heard. "It's Merton! He's hanged himself!" he cried. "Merton's hanged himself in the barn! Quick, come quick!" He led them to the place where he had found Merton. Merton was hanging from a beam at the far end of the barn, a halter around his neck, looking as if he were staring at them. "We must cut him down." Stashko was the first to realize that Merton was still alive. "Quick, we must cut him down." Andrush, Hanzo, Petar, and Krabbit, everyone who had a knife, snapped it open, but none of them could manage to get anywhere near Merton. He seemed to be surrounded by a magic circle. They could take just 3 steps toward him, but not an inch more. After that, their feet seemed to stick to the ground. Taking the point of his knife between thumb and forefinger, Krabbit aimed, threw, and struck the rope. He hit his mark, but the knife fell to the ground powerless. Then someone laughed. The master had entered the barn. He did not so much as glance at his men. He paid them no more attention than if they were dirt. He bent to pick up the knife and cut the rope. There was a thud. Limp as a sack of grain, the hanged man fell to the ground and lay there at the master's feet, a rattle in his throat. "You bungler!" There was contempt in the master's voice. He dropped the knife and spat on the ground in front of Merton. Every one of the men felt as if the master had spat at them, and they were sure that what he said was meant for all of them. "I decide who dies at this mill," cried the master. "No one else decides for me." He went out, and then they could attend to Merton. Hanzo took the noose from his neck, and Peter and Stashko carried him up to bed. Krabbit picked up Tonda's knife from the ground before putting it back in his pocket. He rubbed the handle carefully with a wisp of straw. And that's the end of chapter 3.